for sticking around. Can we have another round of applause for that incredible film? And I'd like to welcome Glenn Holsten, the director of Citizen George, and George Lakey. Thank you guys so much for sharing this film with us, sharing your story with us, and thank you for being here tonight. I'm going to open things up to the audience in just a few moments. Definitely, if anyone has any questions, we're going to have some time to answer them. But George, just to start off, and if you need a moment to collect yourself, feel free. But I know you mentioned you've seen the film, but you haven't yet seen it in a big theater.
I haven't seen it.
And I just wonder, what is it like experiencing your own story in an environment like this with an audience? What has this experience been like for you?
I was feeling connected.
Yeah, I've been feeling connected with you, and that was interesting. I think even more so than in previous times when we've shown it on some wall or other. There's something about a movie theater, maybe lots of experience of shared joy, shared laughs, whatever movies we've been to, right? But anyway, I felt very connected to you, and that's what I love.
Well, I wonder, so if you could both sort of just talk about what the process was like. Glenn, at what point did you sort of become familiar with George and George's story, and how did you both kind of approach this process of telling, some very personal things about yourself, your life, your legacy? How do you sort of establish that trust between filmmaker and subject? Because I think it comes across so beautifully in the film that there was that trust between you both.
Well, very quickly, we have a friend in common named Grace Angelowski, who wrote to me 4 years ago and said, I have a friend, George, who is fierce, and something else nice about you. And people want to do a film about him, and yeah, I know you're a filmmaker, would you be interested? And so I love Grace, and I really respect her opinion, and so I agreed to meet George. It was mid-COVID, it was mid-Trump presidency, and so we decided to get to know each other via Zoom. We had a few Zoom meetings, and George was, Dave says you're not optimistic, but you were so positive about the fact that we could make change, and you weren't forlorn like me and the rest of my friends. And your energy was so infectious that at the moment, I really grabbed onto it. And then there was this team of people that, it was very Quaker. There was a committee that was energized around fundraising for it. And so that's a reality. There's lots of great ideas in this, but when you've got the energy and a team behind it that are serious about raising funds for a film, you do that. Then George had to be working on his memoir, Dancing with History, which is what the animated scenes are lifted from. And he shared an early copy with me, and I saw this. I saw that you were willing to use your whole life's journey as a lesson, not just your activism corner of your life. And that really appealed to me as a filmmaker, because I wasn't really interested in doing an instructional video on how to be an activist. I was interested in a person's life who took us through all of these different points in history. I mean, really, your life is intersected with so much important stuff in our country's history that's why I was drawn to a story about a human being who is amazing, but not perfect, like none of us are. And I saw a film that had lots of entry points for people to join in on this story. Now, trust, how did that happen?
Well, I think I got you from the beginning as the first trustworthy person. Yeah. And also I trust Grace a lot, who I've known for years, an amazing actor who's a Quaker in my meeting. And so I thought, well, if she's vouching for you, that says a lot. You showed to me from the start enormous competency plus enormous openness to what this subject might bring.
And just one more thing, I did share some scenes as we were going. I shared some of the early animations, and I think from that's what happens so you were like, oh, this guy knows what he's doing, kind of thing. But George never once said, I want this in the film, and I don't want that in the film. There was never a conversation like that. It's just kind of a trust along the way. So one thing that I want to share, and I'm not sure if this is connected, but it was really important for me to not make George this unattainable activist. I mean, that's why the family story and the journey with difficulty and loss and pain is so important to have in here, because it makes him fully human. The other thing that I really wanted to do was to create entry points into the film for younger people to see themselves as potential activists. And I really like the idea that activism graphic novels have found a very happy cohabitation. And so for some of the stories that I read in the memoir that were really dynamic, which of course I had no footage, I engaged with the talented motion graphics artist Penny Ashman, and we collaborated on making those sort of graphic novel segments. And I think that helps with the pacing. And I think we've got George in the studio, we've got George out in the field, we've got George as a voiceover for those things. So it's really important that the film just keeps moving, it keeps interest, and there's a lot of chapters in his life too, and that hopefully doesn't feel overwhelming. And that's why we sort of tell the personal journey as well, the activism story. We sort of go back and forth in time, carefully, I hope.
No, not confusing at all. And Ingrid, I wonder if you could sort of talk about what this experience has been like for you, opening up your family's history, really, because it's everyone who's involved story, not just your father's. What that was like for you, sort of covering that material and knowing that that was going to be shared with an audience, and what you sort of really wanted to get across about your father's legacy.
I think I'm still processing. I think all of us Lakeys are still processing what it's like to have our lives out there like that. I will say, I mean, meeting with Glenn was really, really important because I, again, felt the connection that you felt and the trust. I didn't really have any idea what this could be, and I've seen this now a few times, and each time I'm so struck by how well it tells the story of this man. Like, it's the tapestry, because it's not just like an academic story or a political story or a family story. It's all of these pieces, and I think 4 years ago when we started working on this, the world felt a certain way then, and it felt like we really needed that story, and oh my God, do we need that story now? So it feels also like Quakers use a phrase that's sort of like rightly ordered. Like this is the film that we need at this time. And also I think a piece that I hadn't ever really thought about until going through this process of this film was actually just what an American story it is, right? And so to me, what's valuable about it is not a story of exceptionalism. It's not about like George is exceptional. It's just George is a dude who's made a lot of decisions that have been hard decisions, and all of us have to make hard decisions. And if being able to watch this film helps people connect with some part of their own story to be in motion about what's next, that's worth every bit of it. It was really hard for him. This film was really hard. It was like very stressful, and in this way of like he was not raised to be like having a belief that someone should make a movie about you. So it was really brought up a lot of stuff, and he basically all along the way was like, if this is about moving the movement for justice forward, okay. So I think that is where we are.
Trying to say it? All right. That's beautiful. Lovely to see you, Glenn.
Hey.
George's beautiful film. Thank you so much. I'm Lucy. The question I have is, at the end of Martin Luther King's life, he said, we've integrated into a burning house. And
what?
Integrated into a burning house. And with the genocide in Gaza and the conflagration of that, and the revelations here, like including like repression on Swarthmore's campus of protesters. I would love for you to talk about that and give your sense of this time in the light of your life.
Yeah, oh gosh, that's such a great juicy question. And I recently did a 20-state book tour with my most recent book, and that was up all the time, right? Because we're feeling anxious. Everybody feels anxious. I was just at Westtown School with a whole lot of 9th and 10th and 11th graders who were very anxious. So this is an extraordinary time. So, but part of part of my comfort, a huge part of my comfort actually, is that I was trained to be a sociologist out at the University of Pennsylvania. And sociologists tend to look at times of tumult as, quote, interesting. So yes, we get anxious, but also I get curious, right? So I was trying to understand what goes on in periods like this. And at that moment, I happened to be working on a book on the Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Iceland. And I was curious about how their system works. So that's what basically the book was about. But then I also got curious about, well, how did they make it happen? Because 100 years ago, it was a mess over there. And they were coming here, Norwegians were coming here, Swedes were coming here. There was all this immigration from the Nordic countries because there were a lot of people writing the future off for those countries. Now they are way, way ahead of us in terms of social justice, economic justice, all kinds of things. Much more democratic. Individuals have more freedom there than here, and so on. So I got even more curious about, well, how did they make the difference between 100 years ago and now? And I found out that they did it during their periods of greatest polarization that they had ever experienced. With Nazis marching on the street, full out uniformed Nazis marching on the street, and growing Nazi movements in all those countries, and at the same time, growing communist movements. So they were headed, it looked like, for a disastrous civil war, right? And instead, they came up with what they came up with. Whoa, polarization could be fruitful? Well, maybe it's the Scandinavians, they're weird, right? So I thought, okay, how about more examples? So then I thought about my decade when I was born, the 1930s. What was going on? Whoa, it was the glory period of the American Communist Party, the 1930s, right? It growing like mad, and at the same time, Nazis were able to occupy Madison Square Garden for a rally. They had this giant rally there. The Nazis were going like crazy there. And during all that tumult, industrial workers taking over factories, all that tumult, came the greatest progress that we made as a country in the first half of the 20th century. Oh my gosh, I'm getting more and more confused. Okay, another period, another case, George. How about the 1960s? Well, some of us were around, right? At least, yeah. And the 1960s, the Nazis were back. Communists and other left groups were flourishing. Tremendous polarization going on. People getting killed, of course, going along with that. Mississippi, the whole deal. And it can be argued that the 60s, which looped over into the 70s, was the greatest period of progress that we made in the second half of the 20th century. So I said, George, you got it wrong. Polarization doesn't necessarily mean going to Germany, which did as a result of polarization, and Hitler, or Mussolini, came out of Italy out of a period of polarization. Polarization is a period of good luck, folks. This is a time of change. And the kind of change you get depends on you. Whoa. Instead of, oh my God, there's something inevitably horrible here. And so that, if anything, gave me new energy, fresh energy. It was like, oh my gosh, if people only knew that this is our big opportunity like the 1930s and the 1960s, let's do it again. Let's make big time progress. And that's why the Biden bill had to include the first major commitment with regard to climate change in the country, in our country's history, and so on and on and on. We're making already more progress than we give ourselves credit for, but the big opportunities are still coming next year and the following year. But will we be ready to take advantage of this opportunity? I don't know. So for me, it's up for grabs, but I'm still alive. So I'm just really grateful that I came to this understanding, not like on my deathbed and good luck. But instead, I'm with you, and you're with me, and we can make the difference. And I think this film will help people to feel positive enough about change and what they can do with their own lives, so that I'm hoping it'll be on our side.
I don't have a question. I just want to say that I think it is just a fabulous film, just so inspiring, and especially because George used to be the piano player at a sing-along that I used to go to, and I'd never talked to him about any of this kind of stuff. He's just so low-key, like, I had no idea that there was like a famous person in my midst, and, many, many times. And then he lives in my neighborhood, and you say, hey, and now just to see all that he is, really, it's astounding to me, and I'm just so glad I got to come.
Thank you. I mean, it's a life fully lived, and that's another inspiring thing. He doesn't waste a minute.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you, George, for all your work, and Glenn, fantastic film. Absolutely fantastic. I'm wondering, Glenn, what you didn't know George before. What was the thing that you were most impressed by in his, whether or not it was in the film, and what was the most interesting thing that you left out of the film?
He asked what did I find interesting about George? Like, what was the thing that sort of...
So what was the most striking thing to you as you learned about him and his work? And what was the most interesting thing that you left out of the film?
Most interesting thing I left out of the film, I'd like to ask our editor, Vic Carino, if he can sit down in Vic is here. Can I just take a moment just to say that some great talented people are here. Phil Bradshaw, director of photography, is here. Wave your hand, Phil. And Vic Carino, our editor, is here. Wave your hand. Now we're down time, a fabulous producer is here. Mostly it was what I had said earlier about George's relentless energy is really infectious. In fact, when we were filming that climate change walk, they had walked to Vanguard, and then everyone was like, well, it's over, let's go. And I was like, George, do you have a car? He's like, no, I'm walking back. And I'm like, okay, let's go. So that's a real infectious energy to be around. We always had great talks after each shoot. I think we all got smarter from every time we were with George. And there was also great wisdom and great love that you saw walking down the street with him. So that is a kind of a soft answer, but it really was. It wasn't like one light bulb moment that I thought. Now, I can't imagine what we left off. I mean, we had a hard time cutting this down. We cut it down another 20 minutes, but what? Anything, Vic?
We covered it all.
If I think of something, I'll post it on our website, which is George Lakey, Citizen George Film.
Great to stumble into a seat next to the subject of the movie. Enjoy your laugh.
I only left because I needed to pee.
Enjoyed the filmmaking. I wanted to ask if there are any particular insights that stand out from your work in the 2020 election in terms of what we're about to confront in the next couple of weeks. Any lessons we should be thinking about?
With regard to the larger picture, the strategic picture, there's no way that either the right wing in this country or the left wing in this country would be able to take over the country without massive cooperation on the part of the majority of people. A kind of going along with that kind of cooperation. So if we refuse to go along with, let's say Trump and the right wing takes over in some way. If we refuse to go along with that, they're stuck. And that's the importance of the database that we created at Swarthmore College, because we found over and over and over there were dictators that had already achieved state power, which Trump hasn't yet, right? If he does, that had the state to operate with, and were nevertheless defeated by the mass action of people who said no. So we, the people, are actually stronger, especially if we use nonviolent struggle, we're stronger, because with violent struggle, there are various ways they can pick us off. But with nonviolent struggle, we're more likely to be able to overthrow and prevent Trump from being a dictator. So that's a very short answer, and if it doesn't satisfy, good, because that may stimulate you to look more deeply into it.
Democracy is still...
And choose democracy is still, yes, we're not as robust as we were 4 years ago, because it's like both ways, right? If Trump doesn't win, then there's a kerfuffle about that, right? We can expect stuff about that. But if he does win, then it's a different kind of struggle, but it's still a struggle. So, and we weren't able to figure out how to do mass training in a short and coherent way for both of those scenarios. However, websites are important. Go look at whatifTrumpWins.org. WhatifTrumpWins.org does produce at least a fascinating workbook by a colleague, by Daniel Hunter. You saw him in the film, Daniel Hunter, saying that I was the professor who was able to really get him on his rebellion. Remember the young black guy? Yeah. But anyway, Daniel has produced this, whatifTrumpWins.org, put a website up, and a wonderful workbook that's worth your getting. And then at least that takes care of the what if he wins. Then there's the other side, and we're not quite ready for that. And I apologize, but haven't been able to do everything.
Wow.
I think we, unfortunately, the conversation, outside. But thank you guys so much, George, for coming out. And again, if you want to just repeat where folks can find out more about the film, Citizen George.
CitizenGeorgeFilm.com. CitizenGeorgeFilm.com.
Thank you guys so much for coming out. Thank you guys all for.
Woo!